It's Electric Drives. Your electric vehicle future starts right now. Welcome to the show. I'm Anthony Algmin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Bob Reese. It wasn't too long ago I started driving an electric vehicle, and it wasn't easy to learn everything I needed to know to make the transition, and Bob was a key resource in making that possible for me. We created this show to make it easier for others looking to move to electric, and in a world of $5 and $6 gasoline, that's more and more people every day. Our goal with Electric Drives is to cover the basics, brought to you by real people with real jobs, real commutes, real road trips, and who are relying on real vehicles to get us to all of those. We're out there using electric vehicles in our normal lives, and we'll share the wisdom we've gained from living with EVs every day. You can join in the conversation by sending your questions and topic ideas to questions@electricdrives.us, joining our Facebook group, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/electricdrives to get more direct access and help support the show. We're here to share and learn together and reduce the confusion we encounter when going from gasoline to electric vehicles. So, Bob, how are you doing today?
Oh, doing real good, real good.
Good. So I'm excited about today's topic because we are going to talk in more detail about battery management. So this is something that really distinguishes the EV ownership experience from owning a gasoline car. Like we've talked about on previous episodes, you know, when you drive a gasoline car, what we call an ICE car, internal combustion engine car, you drive an ICE vehicle, you just get used to like, oh, my gas is low, I'm going to go fill it up before I go to work the next day or on my way home or whatever. You just kind of watch it or what have you, and then you just kind of monitor it and fill it up. An electric vehicle is a little bit different because you actually need to be thinking about how are we charging that car and to what level do we want to charge the car, and what are the trade-offs inherent with different charging levels, different charging times perhaps, and what we need to be thinking about differently in managing the energy available to us and the range available to us in our car at any given time. So, Bob, why don't you talk to me about how you manage your electric vehicle charging, and we'll kind of use that as a launching off point for some general tips for folks as they are looking to manage theirs.
Well, generally, we've got, in our household, we have 3 plug-in vehicles. We've got a plug-in hybrid, and we've got 2 battery electric vehicles. So we're trying to balance between what the needs are of the family members. Like my daughter has a little smaller battery than the rest of us, so she'll be charging right now until tomorrow morning because she's depleted her battery during the day today. And then my wife will plug in. She's off work tomorrow, so she'll plug in during the day tomorrow, and I'm on the road, so I'll just plug in to the wall outlet at the hotel, or maybe a 220 outlet that they have at the hotel, if I can get one. And generally it's easy because even tonight nobody's using the outlets, so I'm plugged in tonight. So generally I'll take a look. Like last night I knew I had a drive of about 130 miles range today. So I charged up just up to 170 miles range, and that gave me enough buffer that I could drive down to where I was going and charge on a DC fast charger during lunch for a while. And actually all I did was just do a restroom break and got enough to do the rest of the day as far as charging. But generally I don't try to charge to 100%, but it depends on if I'm going a long distance or not. Like in a couple weeks I'll be driving 325 miles, so I'll charge to 100% and then do a couple DC fast chargers along the route at restroom breaks and make the rest of the journey.
So I don't want to be alarmist because I think that there's a lot of that kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt out here around charging and batteries with electric vehicles. I want to liken it to like if those of you who remember when cars used to occasionally come with manual transmissions, they always said like every time you shift gear, you're putting wear on that clutch and on that transmission. And so similarly, like, you're going to use it. Like, you're going to use the transmission, and that's fine. But you realize that with use comes degradation over time, comes, just wear and tear. The same is true with batteries, but on a pretty slow scale. But we have to recognize there are things that impact the longevity or the ultimate charge that the battery can continue to hold. And I think we're all familiar with it at this point. The phones in our pockets or on our desks. I'm sure pretty much everyone who's listening to this may be listening to it on a phone, but your phone is almost guaranteed to be within arm's reach of you right now. How many of you have had a battery that's gotten worse over time? Probably all of us, right? And what happens is when you charge that phone to 100%, you put some stress. These are chemical entities. These batteries are chemical entities, and when they're at 100%, they're kind of as tight and as like ready to go as they possibly can be. That puts stress on them, right? So if you charge to 100%, like you said, it's putting more stress on your battery. Does that mean you should never charge to 100%? Well, of course not. They wouldn't have made 100% if you shouldn't charge to it occasionally. But you realize that, hey, this is going to be a little bit more detrimental to the battery. You know what's more detrimental? Not making it to where you need to go, right? So make sure you can actually get to where you would like to go and charge to the appropriate amount. That in that trade-off scenario, charge what you need to. If you need to go 5 miles, you probably don't need to be charging 100% every day to be able to go those 5 miles. And so there's some additional questions that I'll ask you about in a minute. But when it comes to the charging amount, so what percentage does your battery get? That's one factor to consider. The gold standard is kind of that 80% a day. Like, once you hit 80%, it's like it's in a happy place. They kind of say 20 to 80% is that happy place, and really maybe it's even more like 40 to 80% is the happiest place, because like if you take the battery all the way to zero, it gets a little cranky that way too, because again, chemical compounds inside, like they're the more you get to the extremes, the more stress is on those chemical entities within the battery cells themselves. The other thing to keep in mind is the rate at which you are replenishing the charge in the battery, which is something that is also something to think about. So if you only ever charge with DC fast charging and you dump it in that energy as fast as you can every time you charge, it's going to naturally be a little bit harder on the battery than if you're using a level 1 or level 2 charger. And I've read a lot and kind of studied it, and they said there's not a whole lot of if any meaningful difference, and I'm certainly not an expert in this area, between like level 1 and level 2 charging. Like if you're talking alternating current, you're talking about like how you're bringing it, whichever one you want to do, that's fine. Like there's not really a meaningful difference in battery degradation because you're still at a low enough level that it really doesn't make a difference from that perspective. But the DC fast charging definitely is a higher stress type of function that if you don't need to DC fast charge, don't DC fast charge. If they give you 3 years of free DC fast charging with the purchase of your automobile, that may change your calculus a little bit too, right? So like free's great. And if it means I might lose a little bit of energy usage in 5 years, I'll deal with that then. But like, so everything's a trade-off with this battery management. Anything you would agree with or disagree with in what I just said?
No, I tend to agree. I'm harkening back to my plug-in hybrid. In actuality, it's a 17 kilowatt battery, but you can typically, when you fill it up from basically dead, which really isn't dead because it does keep, there's stories of people running down the battery all the way down and then running the gasoline all the way down, and there's still enough battery reserve that they can run on more distance. But on the top end, it's an 18 kilowatt battery, and you can only put in maybe 12 kilowatts into the battery. So they've been very conservative, and as such, I've got 215,000 miles, and I really haven't seen a loss in battery capacity. So again, they were using some of these cars as test mules and monitoring how they react over the longevity and adapt future generations of cars to what they found from the test bed, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's important to note too. Different makers have different levels of tolerances when it comes to that, and too when it comes to their range estimations. Like Porsche with their Taycan, Porsche's always been one to like understate horsepower numbers and things like that. They're doing it with the electric vehicles too. They're like their range is way more than what they say it is, but they just want to under promise and over deliver, and that's their kind of corporate ethos over at Porsche. More power to them. But some of these makers will hold back more, especially in their early generation cars, because they're trying to get it right, and they really want to be safe about the battery because they're warrantying these things for like 8 years in a lot of cases. So they want to make sure that they're not letting people be too hard on them. And so then they, over time through software updates, Ford has done this already with the Mach-E, is they can adjust how much battery they make available, or in some cases how much power the battery can send for different periods of time, or how much juice the battery can take in, especially in DC fast charging. So, Bob, can you talk a bit from your experience in the field? Explain to the audience out there, what is a charging curve? And what is it like, especially when it comes to DC fast charging? I think charging curves are not really that relevant for level 1 and level 2 charging. You kind of get what you get at whatever the stated rate is. As long as your car can handle it, that's what you're going to get for the most part. Not a big deal because it's going slow enough anyway. Like any charging curve kind of just gets mixed up. But for DC fast charging, what is a charging curve, and how do you manage that, especially when you're on the road and you got to get to clients?
Right. Basically, it's and the perfect analogy of it is filling up an empty swimming pool. And you'll start out with a fire hose and just dump as much water as fast as you can into the swimming pool. And then as it gets toward getting full, then you might switch to a garden hose. And then as you're getting all the way full, if you really want to fill it up, maybe you'll take a coffee cup and add some water to it. So the same thing happens with the charging curve. You might start out at, in my case, I'll start out like 50 kilowatts of energy going into the battery. And then once it reaches 60% of the fill of the battery, then it'll start tapering off. And it may drop down to 35 or 40 kilowatts. And then it'll drop down again once it reaches 80%, which is another reason that some cars are set up to only charge to 80%, because the curve after that point in time, sometimes it's been said that you can get the first 80% into the battery, and to get that final 20% will take you the same amount of time, because it has to taper off so that it doesn't send too much into the battery and cause issues.
Yeah, well, there's only so much room for that juice to go, There's only so much room for it to go, and as you're adding it, you're also developing heat. And so you've got to dissipate the heat. So you'll hear the car's air conditioning turning on, or the heater turning on in the car to maintain battery temperature, so that it can reach it at the optimal amount of rate. That's a good question that you made me think of. Is it faster or slower, generally speaking, to DC fast charge in the wintertime versus the summertime? Is it easier to heat up that battery so it can get the charge going into it, or is it easier to cool down that battery to make sure it's not getting too hot for being able to take that charge efficiently?
I always charge faster in the summer, but I don't have a very sophisticated battery type of chemistry, and there are a number of vehicles out that really, they'll see that you're going to a charging station on the navigation system, and they'll precondition the battery, warm it up or cool it down, so that when it does get plugged in, it can receive the most electrons at the fastest rate.
Yeah, this stuff is pretty sophisticated, especially when you're using the built-in navigation, which varies greatly in its capabilities from one maker to another. I mean, that we'll have a whole other conversation around software and some of the things that have been baked into electric vehicles, which sometimes they're very core, like this charging preconditioning, and sometimes they're just completely tangential, like lane keep assist and other kind of automated driving functions. There's nothing about electric vehicles that means those have to be commingled. But we'll talk about that on another episode, later on. But when I think about that charging curve, and I think about the car, it's like a lot of the times the charging curve, wherever you are when you first start charging, it's like when you're the thirstiest, right? You're going to get as much in as you can as quickly as possible, and then you'll slowly taper off. So like the swimming pool analogy, but it's in some cases very immediate. Like within a few minutes, you'll go from your peak charging rate to a much more moderate rate, and that just it varies. Right. Every car is different from these different manufacturers, and sometimes those cars are different amongst each other because they'll get software updates or the new model years will change things. Battery chemistry can vary from car to car, even certainly from different makes and different model years. So there's a lot of complexity to all of this. The thing is that people need to realize is like most of the complexity isn't that important. The key that you have to remember is charge to 80% if you can. Use level 1 and level 2 charging when you can. If you have to charge more to get to where you need to go, do it, by all means. And then just recognize, like, the battery's there, use it. It's right. What, it's a big part of the price of your car. It's a big part of the car. But, like, this isn't something that's going to go bad. Like, a battery doesn't just go bad in these cars very often. It's like an engine going bad. Bob, you've put more miles on these things than anyone I know. If you're talking 45,000 miles on your current car, or your 80,000 miles on your current car, right?
Right.
45,000 miles a year tracking. Like you're putting so many miles on. How much battery diminishing have you actually witnessed from these kind of high miling?
I'm really not noticing anything per se.
So within a couple or few percent of its original capacity.
I think so. I really don't know. I haven't, because it all depends on your temperatures, how fast you're driving. Today I was driving into the wind, so my range was lower than the guessometer was telling me that the range would be. It's hard to factor. Now on the car that's got 215,000 miles, that one typically is showing when we first bought it, the same amount of mile of range. So again, that car was only going 20% to 80% as far as battery charging health. So it was well within the confines of ideal operation.
Yeah. So I really just want to emphasize to the folks out there, it's like, realize like this car is going to last you. And what's nice too is you're not worried about these oil changes. You're not worried about a lot of the other moving parts and hoses and belts and all that stuff. The car doesn't have them. They just don't have them. It can't break if you don't have them. The electric motors, while the electrons are doing things in the battery, there's few moving parts in these things, and your power doesn't diminish the way it does in a traditional gas powered engine. It's really tied to the battery, but like I think I'm expecting good longevity from these things, and I think they're being engineered to have that kind of longevity.
Yeah, there's a lot of car makers that are very smart that way. And they've also learned from those that weren't as smart. Like some of the first cars that came out with batteries were using just non-coolant, just using air to cool the batteries. And they noticed the longevity went down. So then they and other manufacturers then went for having a coolant going through the batteries to maintain the temperatures and to keep them in a certain operating range for maximum efficiency and minimal deterioration.
And it feels too like I'm of two minds. One is these batteries are good enough now. Like there's so much you can do with these electric vehicles today, with especially the latest generation of them. Like you're getting plenty of range. You're getting plenty of longevity. The fast charging has really opened the doors towards being able to take these things on road trips. I mean, you're a testament to that for sure. And then at the other end of it, I'm also like, man, we are just getting started here. This is just the beginning of where this battery technology is going, where charging technology is going, where the efficiencies of it. You know, I also have to say, so I have a Facebook friend that he posted this thing. It was a picture of a coal plant, like coal mine with trucks taking the coal to the coal plant. It's like, here's where your electric vehicle energy's all coming from. And I'm like, okay, let's break this down. So for the first part, like economies of scale. So economies of scale, just like we were talking, like the law of diminishing marginal returns, which we're not going to get into the details on that because it's all nerdy. This is like the economics 101 course that I took that I'm like, I remember something. But the economies of scale are simple, right? A big honkin' power plant, even if it's burning coal, is probably going to be much more efficient in terms of how it's doing its job, creating electricity, creating energy, and how it's maintaining not polluting the environment as much as possible compared to your relatively tiny little engine on 4 wheels moving all around the country. Like, just that alone. So even if the electric vehicles were being powered by the dirtiest coal plants possible, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's still going to be materially better for the environment and for the world and for, you know, just the efficiencies of the whole situation compared to 1-by-1 internal combustion engines rolling all over the place. Like that. So that bothered me because I'm like, we are still, though, all that said, that's where we are right now. And where we are going with this and where these batteries are going to, I mean, you even look in the last 5 years, the battery technology, the car technology, the software, all of it is tremendous improvements in the last 5 years. And we are going to continue innovating and continue to make these electric vehicles better and better in coming years. And so, like, where we are now is pretty amazing. Where we're headed is truly outstanding. It's truly unbelievable where this is all going to go.
The discussion of where the sources of energy are coming from is a whole different subject. And in our case, in the Chicagoland area, we have a lot of nukes, and especially at night, the nukes and the windmills and so on provide a majority of the power, and that's why sometimes if your time of day charging curves, you'll go negative like 2 o'clock in the morning until like 6 o'clock in the morning as far as the cost of electricity. Yeah. So, plus on the coal-fired plants, there's a lot of scrubbers, and the scrubbers really do a nice job. It's just they're taking so much coal to produce electricity. But in our cases, generally we're charging the vehicles in the middle of the night when it's not used as much. Right. And that does bring up, too, if you're going to go with an electric vehicle, really, you know, the cost advantages are pronounced no matter what. But if you have, like we do in the Chicagoland area, we have the option to do real-time pricing or at least time of use type pricing, which can significantly, Bob, to like your point, is, you know, if you can charge overnight and you get a much lower rate of electricity overnight, you can really do a great job in terms of fueling your vehicle with energy, you know, compared to the gas powered cars. And that's definitely something, you know, to keep in mind as you think about, okay, what am I paying for electricity? In California, biggest state for electric vehicles anywhere, and they pay through the nose for their electricity compared to Illinois, for sure. Right. And so there's, you know, but it's still a compelling value proposition, but it's just one more factor, one more thing to keep in mind. You know, as you think about how you're getting your energy for where you're charging, you know, hopefully in this episode you've learned, you know, how these different factors, as you navigate them in your own existence with electric vehicles, you know, all these factors play a role in what you end up choosing to do, how you end up working with the vehicle, but they're all solvable problems and they're not life and death. They're just
variations of trade-offs, variations of decisions that you want to be thoughtful about as you go about working with your electric vehicle. Bob, anything left to add before we call it a show?
No.
All right, well, then that wraps up our show for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that YouTube bell icon. Please join our Facebook group and send your questions and topic suggestions to questions@electricdrives.us. If you would like to get live virtual recording studio access for when we're doing these recordings, get your questions and topic suggestions to the top of the list, and help support the show, join us on patreon.com/electric drives. Thank you for spending some time with us, and we wish you a smooth road ahead on your own electric drives. Thanks, everybody.